Hello, my name is Aditya Devarakonda, and in this presentation, I will be discussing the significance of Alison Bechdel's use of hand-drawn images of her journal entries and photographs in the graphic novel Fun Home. Fun Home is not a typical graphic novel in the sense that the content is presented in a very serious nature. As discussed by Sam McBeam, Fun Home, like other works such as Mouse, redefined the potential scope and the genre of the graphic memoir. The delivery of the narrative through the comic style is meant to create an environment for the reader to see the story through rather than be a simple exchange of information which could have been done through a classic novel. Bechdel's choice to reproduce hand-drawn images of her journal pages and photographs as opposed to including them in their original form is a creative decision, which adds to the immersive experience of the memoir. This creates a more personal experience between the audience and the author. Not only do Bechdel's drawings place an emphasis on the work she has taken the time to reproduce by hand, but they also add a visual insight into her ideas, which express messages she may not have been able to convey through a solely verbal mode of communication. By creating the drawings of the artifacts herself, Bechdel is able to control what information from the journal entries and photographs the readers receive, and these images add to the authenticity and human connection between the messages expressed in the content of the narrative and the reader. After coming out to her mother, Bechdel begins by expressing how devastated she is by her lack of understanding and support. The journal entry regarding this event specifically is recreated to be slightly messy and impromptu, adding to Bechdel's distraught state, while the blood smears on the left-hand side of the journal are symbolic of her desperation and pain in the situation. While the idea that Bechdel's mother did not want to accept her daughter coming out and the sorrow that Bechdel felt can be expressed verbally, the small visual cues such as the blood and the manner in which the letter was written add to the audience's level of understanding and connection to the situation. The reproduction of the letter gives a dimension of realism to the work. Were Bechdel to have added the original journal entries, a disconnect would have occurred between the realm in which the story is told and the realm in which it occurred. By redrawing the journal entry, the narrative remains cohesive in terms of the fashion and perspective from which the life of Bechdel is portrayed. Similarly, when Bechdel discusses her initial inklings of obsessive-compulsive disorder through her first journal entries, her verbal description of how she recorded her daily activities and her usage of the phrase, "I think," in the entries, give the reader a basal understanding of the issue. However, through the visual depictions of her journal over time, the audience is better able to understand the progression of the disorder. Through the addition of these hand-drawn representations of her journal entries, Bechdel is able to include only the parts of the journal which convey the point that she is trying to make, without the excess information that may draw away from the central idea being presented. Initially, there are no oddities in her writing style, but slowly the addition of "I think" followed by the usage of the symbol denoting the phrase show Bechdel's descent into more and more severe stages of the disorder. The visual depiction of this progression gives the audience a further understanding of the experiences from Bechdel's perspective. This allows the narrative to be more focused and increases the clarity of the ideas that Bechdel presents. The reproduction of the journal entries gives Bechdel a greater amount of control in ensuring that her personal message is what the audience understands after reading the work. Bechdel's reproduction of visual artifacts from her life is not only limited to her journal entries. Throughout the novel, she redraws photographs to add to the visual components of the literature. In discussing the photos from the box she found, the pictures are drawn to represent the photos very realistically in comparison to the style of images Bechdel regularly uses to advance the story. While the majority of the novel is drawn in a typical cartoon sense, the photos reproduced are drawn with much more attention to detail in order to accurately portray the real photos. As stated by Bechdel in an interview, this juxtaposition of illustrative styles is meant as a reminder to the reader that the events in the novel actually occurred. It is her way of preventing the audience from losing sight of the depth of the narrative due to the fact that it is presented through a comic media. By hand drawing these artifacts, she is able to establish a human connection with the reader and not only show the audience what she wants them to see, but also emphasize the differences in content through different styles of illustration. Bechdel's use of hand-drawing journal entries and photographs adds to the graphic novel by providing a visual framework for the text to be interpreted through. It also allows the reader to understand a more accurate interpretation of Bechdel's intent in the production of her work. The small visual cues in her journal entries express ideas and emotions which are not easily expressed through words. These cues add a level of symbolism for the readers to understand while analyzing the verbal component of the work and create an extra medium for expression. Her reproduction of entries also are visual manifestations of the trouble she faces at certain instances in her life. They allow the reader to grasp the severity and importance of the events and problems she is having. The style of her writing, as well as her idiosyncrasies in the writing, are pictorial representations of her mental state. The drawings of the photographs give a sense of realism to the story. It prevents the audience from wandering astray in the comic medium and not realizing the gravity of the content. As stated by Robin Warhol, Bechdel's use of drawings are meant for the reader to see and understand more minute details in the narrative without a formal description. Her usage of these hand-drawn artifacts is vital due to the fact that it is what makes the idea of a narrative presented in a comic media relatable, all while retaining the level of maturity and seriousness of the content and adding an element of reality in a media which is typically not realistic.